Started. We've got a lot to get through here in the hour that we have, so I want to respect everybody's time. Thank you all for being flexible and rescheduling for this afternoon. And we just have some rules that we have to follow, and we're following them. So it looks like, based on who we have here, we've got a quorum for the committee, which is fantastic. And I guess let's just do some quick introductions or for the folks online. Jeff DenBleyker of Jacobs.
John Left, Division Y.
Ben Stireman, Forestry Clearance State Lands.
Anna Freeze, Commissioner's Office. Christine Rumsey, USGS.
Brian Rowland, USGS.
Angela Gong, Forestry Clearance State Lands.
All right, and then I saw Rob Dubuque online, Tim Hawks, and Jake Alexander, Jim Harris, hi, and Craig Miller, great, and Ted Belling. All right, great. Well, are there? Okay, great. I didn't realize that. All right, fantastic. So the purpose of today's meeting, at our last meeting on May 27th, we had a great discussion talking about the berm, and specifically talking about the reduction or decline in nitrogen concentrations in the South Arm, and talked about the significance of that, what have the historical patterns been that we've observed, and then what are some options given the concern with declining nitrogen. What are the options that we have for mitigating that, or at least slowing it down? And the option that we talked about at the end of the last meeting was to run an experiment here for several months, where we would remove the berm or lower the berm back down to its original configuration and elevation at 4183 for several months until we have to raise it again to 4190 when the lake level drops that low. And so there are a number of homework items that we had, that action items that came out of that have here in the agenda. One is, there was a good question with regard to, we saw the results with total dissolved nitrogen, but Thomas had asked if there was a similar pattern with regard to total nitrogen. And I guess the background there is just, are we measuring cellular nitrogen, in the phytoplankton or not? So is there a change? Does that affect the outlook? The second, number 3 there, is what is the best estimate of when the lake hits 4190? So are we going to have to raise the berm here in a month, or do we have until November for an experiment that will inform that? One concern that was raised was with regard to the salinity rule that DWQ helped, I guess, in response to the legislature. And Joe's question was, if we lower the berm and the salinity in the South Arm goes up, that's an artificial change in the salinity. And does the rule have any latitude in there, so that they're not, now if the salinity does go above 150, that now they have to change their operation because of an experiment that this committee recommended. And then just the logistics of getting permits and making the modification. So that's all kind of preamble, kind of updates on some of these things, homework items, and really the discussion that we want to be able to make sure we've got time to talk about is to answer the question, should the berm be modified now as an experiment? And I took the language that we had talked about at the last meeting and drafted a motion. There were several different attempts to start a motion, and so I kind of stitched them all together into this text that's in the agenda here. And we can review that when we get there. So,
hey, Jeff, just one quick thought. Just because this is so important, do we really want to consider it an experiment? Because I really think this is just testing our ability to bring back salt, but I think we know what the goal is. I think we know what the likely outcome would be. And I just think maybe framing it as an experiment makes it sound like we're, test tubing the Great Salt Lake a little bit.
a good question. I mean, I think that's, you know, I mean, what does the rest of the committee think? I think the perception is definitely a consideration.
I just, like, my personal thought on this is that, to me, this isn't much of an experiment because I think we know what the desired outcome is. And I think we know what we're trying to, really what we're testing here is like, are we able to bring these salts back, you know, and what could the potential impact on nutrients be along with that, so we can determine, you know, how we balance this out in the future. And it's more refining this. But I just would hate to think like seeing a headline that's like states experimenting on this, because that's really like we've come a long ways to get to this point. And I don't want it to seem like we don't know what we're doing, because I think we do. So I just want to make sure that like that's not how this gets phrased later, is that we're performing an experiment.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I don't know that it matters that much, but
Well,
I agree. I think it's a database. It's a data-backed decision, you know, like we have a lot of data to suggest this path forward.
spent 5 or 6 years developing that, right? So now we're testing, we're flexing. We're going to see how well we can do what we think we can do, which we haven't quite done yet on the north to south flows. So, okay, cool. So maybe if we get to the point of making a recommendation, we don't use the word experiment.
Manage.
yes.
Can I ask, and this is for you,
Mhm.
do you have a feel for how much the railroad is going to be so generous with their efforts and time and to do some of these things to a point where they just say, now it's up to you? 'Cause
Yeah, that's a good question. I was going to touch on that a little bit, but I'll just throw that out there now that Eric Dixon from Water Resources has had a good working relationship with these guys. So we've all kind of stayed in contact as the construction and whatnot has happened. And I asked him if he would reach out after our last meeting just to gauge interest from them on whether they could do this or if we'd have to go through procurement. And they said that they would be willing to lower it and raise it. So they're willing to do that work at this point. We obviously have to work with their schedule, but it sounded like they were willing to help out again. It sounds like they're also busy, right now. So we'll have to figure out when they can get out there. But it sounds like they would be willing to both raise and lower it. And then we also have ongoing funding we can use if we have to procure something to do that. So I think we're in good shape that way. But honestly, like they'll get it done faster too, because they have people, they have equipment, they have rock. And free is also a price I really like. So, yeah.
Yes. Great. That's
Yeah.
great news.
Yeah.
Well, good. Well, Christine, do you want to kick us off and just bring us back up to speed on the nitrogen data?
Yes.
And
Thanks, sir. Cool. Okay, so I'm just going to jump into calculations like I showed last time. I did kind of a series of analyses looking at total dissolved nitrogen in the south arm and then comparing that to flux at the new breach. And so I'm just repeating that essentially, but looking at total nitrogen instead. And I'm putting this giant disclaimer because these are all preliminary results subject to revision, and we're doing this for time to meet the need for timely best science. So take it with a grain of salt, but it's I'm doing my best with all of it. So with South Arm, here just a kind of a plot of raw data that we collect in the South Arm from 2010 to present. And these are nutrient concentrations in milligram per liter. On the left is total nitrogen, and on the right is total dissolved nitrogen. Just to kind of show you the raw data set, again, when we have presence of the deep brine there, we see higher concentrations at depth for both total nitrogen and dissolved nitrogen. And a large fraction of nitrogen in the system is of dissolved fraction. So just a little bit of context there. And then these two lines represent when the berm was modified. After that point, many of you know we had to switch labs. So there is also a change in analytical labs that have had to be used, which is important when we talk about total nitrogen in particular. And that is because it's much more difficult to analyze than the total dissolved nitrogen has been. So if we just focus on this top left plot, the take home is that if I compare our nutrient record from the National Water Quality Lab up to about 2023, 2024, versus Chesapeake Biological Lab results after that time for paired samples, where we have paired samples. Chesapeake Biological Lab is measuring about 24% higher than National Water Quality Lab. So keep that in mind for the subsequent analyses. That's why we've really honed in on total dissolved nitrogen for the last analysis, which compares much better between the two labs. So that this is, yeah, just keep that in mind when we start to look at masses and concentrations. And then kind of, I know it's hard to see on the right plot, but essentially we've also done tests at the lab to look at spike recoveries, which is essentially a technique to see how well an analysis is performing, and total dissolved nitrogen total nitrogen performs the worst. So just keep that in mind. I wanted to address Thomas's question here, but the data, there's a reason we haven't used total nitrogen previously. So just looking at volume weighted total nitrogen concentration in milligram per liter for the South Arm from 2010 to present. If I do statistical analyses kind of on a chunk of time before and after berm modification, there is no statistically significant difference between after berm modification and before berm modification for total nitrogen. There was for total dissolved nitrogen. And keep in mind again that we're dealing with kind of a bias after the berm was modified because of that new lab we had to switch to. If we look at masses, so this is total nitrogen mass, you can visually see how it looks like there's kind of a drop after berm was modified, so that would indicate less total nitrogen in the South Arm after berm modification. However, the statistical tests were not significant, indicating that before and after berm modification, total nitrogen masses are the same. Again, keep in mind the biases that are present in the data set. If we pivot to the nutrient flux at the new breach, I basically repeated the analysis that Scott had done. So on this plot on the right, we're looking at total nitrogen concentrations in milligram per liter since the time the new breach has been opened, so about 2017 to present. Just context, south to north concentrations of total nitrogen are around 4.5 milligram per liter. And then for north to south, they're much higher, around 9.2 milligram per liter for total nitrogen. So what we're kind of getting back from the north is a much higher concentration of the nutrient. And if we look at fluxes, this also is very similar to what we saw for total dissolved nitrogen. The red dots are north to south, the green dots are south to north. And so after berm modification, that kind of orange dashed line, you can see how the fluxes of north to south input of nutrients just really drop off. And comparing the two time periods from about 2017 to 2022, we estimate that we were getting about 7.59 tons per day of nitrogen coming in from the North Arm. And after the berm was modified, that was reduced to about 0.9 tons per day. So a really substantial decrease in load coming in from the North Arm, estimated to be around 2,400 tons per year if we were to extrapolate that rate to an annual time extent. And just looking at the net flux, so that's kind of comparing what's going out of the South Arm to what's coming in from the North Arm at the new breach. On the right shows the condition before the berm was modified. And these positive values just indicate that there's kind of always a loss of nitrogen at the breach, but after the berm was modified, we see a much greater loss of nitrogen, net loss of nitrogen to the North Arm. And we're not just, again, not getting much flux back. So that's really all I had prepared for that, Jeff. If you have other questions, I can answer it. But essentially, the data are less reliable. They're not showing a change between pre and post berm. But again, we have the highest confidence in the total nitrogen values that I showed last time.
But it's not in conflict with the story we're seeing from the total dissolved nitrogen.
Not necessarily. It's just less statistically robust.
Right.
Yeah.
Any questions from anybody?
I have just a general question about, making sure that if we cover the berm, that we're tracking the right information, in the time period when it's low, so we can kind of validate some of these assumptions. Do we feel like we have the right monitoring right now for nutrients, between the breach? Or is there any additional sampling, testing, monitoring, anything that we need to be considering to make sure we take this valuable time that we're...
I would consider monitoring more frequently. So typically at USGS, what we do is we monitor during runoff every month to just try and capture kind of a more hydrologically dynamic period, and then we kind of back off after runoff's over. But if we do something like this, I would suggest that we just get more measurements during that time, maybe the 2 or 3 months in which it's able to be open, whether that's monthly or even every few weeks, to just make sure we're correctly measuring all the nutrient constituents. In terms of measuring more nutrient constituents, if there's any analyte we're missing, I don't think so. We're kind of doing the full suite. But given the uncertainty, especially in total nitrogen values, if we're interested in that, I do think more samples would be useful.
Okay. I think that would be useful, even if it's not just for nitrogen or, nutrients. I think like understanding what's going on out there and doing more frequent sampling and monitoring would be
Definitely
good to know how to deal with this in the future.
I don't know Ryan's thoughts on this, but even just being able to get more discharge measurements, if you open up the breach, we're gonna have bidirectional flow again. And Mike Freeman tells me this all the time, who is very familiar with new breach discharge. Every time we modify that cross section, we basically have to start from scratch and trying to build a relationship between a discharge reading and a late stage. And so we're kind of starting from scratch in our ability to kind of develop a continuous relationship there. So I would say just the more measurements, the better in terms of discharge. And really, because you have to understand, every time we go out there, it's 1 point in time, and it's pretty good during stable, I can say calm conditions where, the physics are what they are and the flow is going to flow how it is. But the more conditions we can capture, if it's windy, if there's slightly more north to south flow for some reason, I think it's going to be.
Totally. Yeah. No. Yeah. I think that I'm just thinking out loud. Every couple of weeks, we probably want to do a discharge measurement. Potential sample as well. So, yeah.
We need to hire a bridge troll.
Yeah.
That just lives under there, continuously monitors and samples. But
I thought about that, but
we
maybe
need
not.
future requests.
We need to invent a drone acoustic Doppler current profiler.
Oh, that's way better than a bridge troll. All right. Okay.
Actual
Trolls.
trolls. Definitely flutter.
All right. Thanks, Christine. I appreciate that.
When you are the nitrogen values sample that you collect, are those from the actual deep brine flowing through the breach, or is that a sample from the North Arm?
It's at the breach. So what we do is we have what's called a Niskin sampler. So you kind of lower it as it's closed, and then you lower it and then open it and fill it out. We do. And that we weren't able to do that for a long time because there just actually wasn't enough sample and wasn't flowing, but we've been doing that.
Okay. Any other questions? All right. Okay. All right. Well, let's move on to the next one. And Christine, the question we had was with regard to when do we think we might hit 4190?
Yes.
Get your crystal ball out.
Cool.
Christine,
Yes. And I immediately was like, yeah, sorry.
the Christine ball.
Oh, right. Yes.
You're ruining my next Halloween costume.
So good, I love that. All right, so yeah, then I kind of had initially said, no, we can't do that. And then Brian and Mike and everyone said, yeah, we can do that. Okay, so I did it. What I did was because the rate of decline changes throughout the season, right? So during June 15th and September 15th, the slope of that decline is kind of the steepest, and that's where we're heading into it. So what I did, I know that's overwhelming. We don't have to look at this slide too much, but it's just for me. But from June 15th to September 15th, I basically said for every year during that time period, I'm going to calculate how much we're dropping every day in lake elevation, and kind of so that those black dots are the distribution of that from the 1960s. So it's just been going up steadily over time. And then that blue line is kind of an average condition of all of those trend lines. And then looking at this distribution, I considered three scenarios. So one is like the average rate of decline, that kind of number one. The second one is a higher end, because I think we all can kind of guess that this might be a kind of we might lose a lot of water this year in the South Park. So kind of a higher end. And then the third one I picked was just the highest observed ever, to just give you a range. So doing the math on all that, which I show on the slide, but I won't go through. For an average condition, we're estimating about September 10th is when we hit 4190. For a kind of a highish end rate of decline, August 23rd, and then for the highest we've ever observed, August 15th. And I have to say, looking at the data, that highest observed, I think that was 2024 or even 2023. Anyway, I got the impression that it kind of happened on years where we had a lot of water coming in the spring, and so you had a lot to come, and that might have been through the breach. So take that highest observed, the grain of salt. It might kind of be in a condition where it actually rose a lot and then.
Just out of curiosity, did you look at the rise or the decline this year to see if there's any trend based on whether we're average or below or above based on like
It kind of
temperatures?
followed the shapes that it has
Okay.
over the last like 10 years or so. So it's kind of hard to kind of isolate it at what it might be.
Is it a confounding variable that we don't have any northbound return flow?
Yes.
Where we have in the past, a lot of this data, right? For a lot of that data that's plotted up there. So that introduces some more uncertainty into the estimate.
Well, that's okay though. I think the bottom line is it's probably going to fall below 4190 before we hit bottom this year, right? I mean, that's in any scenario, that's likely the case.
I think that is the case.
Okay. I would just a point on that is I'd like to make sure that in the recommendation, we normally talk about like a plan for, when we would raise it, but I think here it's going to be based off of an observation that we see in the breach, like how well it's importing salt. Maybe it imports salt so well that we need to think about doing it sooner, but I think just like, constant observation and maybe ramping up on our testing and sampling to understand what's going on there, and then reconvening. But I think that's something we should consider if we're going to make any recommendations to do.
I guess the question is 4190 the trigger where we literally have to go out, raise it right away, or is it
I
something
think
where
we need to
have-
figure that out. I mean, I know what the law says, but I think we have some things to work out on our end to make sure that we're interpreting it the right way. So I think that's why I think this was just, what the goal is now, which I think is, we want to import salt right now, and we stick with that, and then we'll probably have some discussion items that need to happen sooner than later.
Okay. Great. Then so moving on, the next question was for Jim Harris, just with regard to the salinity rule and the concern that if we're importing salt, if we're artificially importing salt, and that raises the salinity of the South Arm uncomfortably high, then will that affect mineral operations?
Yeah, well, as you're all aware, as it's written, in a 90-day window, which would define the most recent current salinity, if it goes above the 150, the way it's written, there'd be prohibition on any discharge of salts to the South Arm. There is one off-ramp to that is if it is considered to be a de minimis impact, and we wrote those into the rule to allow for operational maintenance and things like that, so that Compass's facilities can actually continue to run and not necessarily flush the ponds, but allow for their processing to continue. So we haven't had a chance to meet with our AG on this, but as it's written, it's not something that could be necessarily deferred. I think we still haven't had a chance to consult with Forestry, Fire, and State Lands on this either. So I think I'd like to better understand what their limitations are, and what kind of flexibilities we might have in that documentation. And then ultimately, one of the concerns I have is seeing exactly how much salt are we bringing in, how high are we going to let the lake go in terms of the salinity, and will that potentially rebound before, say, pumpets might discharge into the lake? Because I just, there's some side effects of this, obviously, that I wouldn't want the management to necessarily impair somebody's ability to operate.
Hey, Jim, just a quick thought, and I know you and I haven't talked more than what we did at the last, last SAC meeting or during, but it seems to me like the de minimis impact, it was really targeted on like releases that wouldn't negatively affect the salt balance in the lake. And to me, when we're actively trying to import salt, and that's the whole goal of the management, I wonder if there's a way to squeeze that into the de minimis impact side of things and just say, the impact isn't there because we're actually trying to bring back salts. And then if that can't happen, I would say that it would be really interesting to explore the rules and just see if maybe we ought to consider adding to that de minimis impact, just like when the state is actively managing the berm for import of salt from north to south, that this, that would also be the time where they would not be, regulated for discharge of salt. Because I think it's just, obviously the intent was to limit discharges of salt at times we're trying to manage to keep it fresher on the south arm. In this case, so I know that doesn't resolve anything for today. And I know if we're going to make a recommendation that might put some of the mineral companies in a hard spot, but I do think I think it's really obvious what the goal is. And so I think that, I'd recommend we find a solution so we're not hamstringing ourselves over such a kind of weird thing that is counterintuitive to what we're actually trying to do.
Correct. Great. And I think, one thing we might need to have in line is map out exactly that, that proposed salinity adjustment so that we can have a data-based decision for our director to make in terms of what is de minimis, what is not. So anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, you're right, Jim. The de minimis was, it was intended to, allow for continued plant water discharge, which is orders of magnitude smaller than, mineral return by volume and mass that's being sent back to the lake. It seems like, what Ben had just suggested, could be integrated into, the UPD's permit. I think that would be pretty straightforward, to allow for all discharges when there's active measures being taken to, import salt to the south arm.
Yeah, and I just want to make sure, Jim, that I don't put you guys in a hard spot because I know that's it's not our rule to make participated in the writing, but I just think it's important for us to go back and try to problem solve this. And I really think at this point, I think it'd be worth hitting the books again. And Joe, I know that's not going to make it easy for you to make a vote today, but I think if we get to that point, but I do think again, this is I don't want to get held up just because we can't figure out this weird, this weird nuance. So,
Bill.
Yeah, in the many meetings we had discussing the rule, this came up. Right, we talked about needing to look at loads and expected impacts of the loads, and Jim argued effectively, and I agree with it, that the rule also had to be simple. But we had recognized this could happen, and we thought at the time that there'd be enough wiggle room to address a case like this. So whether it's the UPD's permit or what, but we anticipated this kind of a shortcoming of the simplicity of the rule. So Jim, I can't remember what exactly that out is, but it seems like we designed it to allow an out.
Well, like I mentioned, the one off ramp was the de minimis determination. The other off ramp was having were for those operations that were actually removing salt from their so the south arm operations were allow them to discharge back into the lake when it was above 150, because in essence they're removing salt mass from the lake in their operations. But those were the two off ramps. And we added also a provision that allowed the director to determine if this group forecasted a future that where you were certain that it was going to go above 150, that they could preventatively, preemptively, so to speak, stop any additional discharges to the lake. So,
right, and this is the other side of that.
Yeah.
No, that's good. That is what it was. Thank you for reminding me.
Yeah. Right. Ben just put a note in there. Yeah. The other off ramp is when it still is below 150. So that was what kind of one of my fundamental questions was, can we do this operation and keep it below 150? I don't know that I was seeing a good projection
Right there.
would allow for transportation of the nutrients and still prevent it from going above 150, say this winter.
The other aspect that you know that's on my radar is our voluntary agreement, and this is admittedly an extreme condition, but if on June 15th in future years the lake is 4190 or below, we're effectively shut down. So you know, in my view, you know, I see that as not a possibility in 2028, but you know, if we had another poor snowpack and followed by another, we you know very well could be in that paradigm. So I look at maintaining elevation in the South Arm as you know as important, and this action will you know it'll reduce elevation in South Arm. It'll accelerate it from status quo, I guess. We're gonna take more from the South Arm and move it to the north, and you're gonna be a faster rate of decline if I'm thinking about it, right?
Well, maybe temporarily. I think it's preparing us for the other side of that coin, though, right, Joe? So, and we can't. I think that you know we've discussed this in depth, but you know, like we can't leave it where it's at. We know we're going to have to probably raise it at some point based on what this law says. So do we do what we can right now to prepare to raise it so we can maximize the benefits of raising it? And I think that's where, you know, if you really want to talk about offsetting potential curtailment or, you know, there's reductions like that, that's where we're going to see that, you know, that benefit. But another thing I just wanted to point out as well is that, you know, the salinity forecasts were like hovering right around 150. It's not like we were like blowing that out of the water. So I would anticipate that this is going to be fairly temporary in nature. Like immediately once we, you know, raise that berm again and stop the bidirectional flows, it's immediately going to begin dropping. I would assume, you know, especially if we're raising it at the, you know, the end of the evaporation season as we start to see more inflows from the Bear River and whatnot. So I would imagine that's going to be very temporary. So another thing I would say is like, if there's an operational efficiency that you guys have, Joe, where, you know, maybe you just don't do that for those couple of months. And in the meantime, we also work with DEQ to see if there's like exceptions in the rules for when we're actively trying to do this. And we just all work in good faith to figure out, you know, what a solution looks like there. I think we all know what, you know, what the intent is. It's just trying to figure out like, how do we actually arrive at that solution? So.
Yeah. And I offered before, Ben, last meeting, you know, we're actively negotiating the, you know, our UPD's renewal, you know, by end of October. So I think we can, you know, engage, you know, on this and the other aspects of this.
Okay.
And just to be clear, I'm not sure if I mentioned it in front of this group, you know, we've temporarily terminated operations on the west side when the lake is below 4194. We just can't operate enough pumps, and evaporation rate exceeds pumping rate, and so it's a waste of resource and time and effort. So Compass is less sensitive to North Arm elevation as we were, you know, in 2021-22 timeframe. So I just wanted to throw that data point out there.
Okay. Great. Well, so I guess to try to summarize, we don't have a clear answer on this flexibility of the rule. It sounds like we will probably have to have some more discussions, refine where the flexibility is. So that we recognize the fact that we are, if we modify the berm, we're making the choice to modify the salinity to, we will be importing salt into the South Arm, and so we recognize we're doing that. It sounds like the conversation will need to continue, you know, define the flexibility, perhaps through the UPD's permit that Compass is negotiating now, perhaps, you know, via the rule. But but we don't have, it's not black and white, but it sounds like the intent is that we're recognizing that we are modifying the salinity and we don't want to have to affect their operation.
Well, I think we don't want to affect their operation, but we also don't want to let this like salinity time period, you know, the time period in which they wouldn't be able to discharge dictate how we're going to manage the berm, because I think that's also, you know, could have a massive impact into the future on how we do this. So both nutrients and salt mass.
Okay. Great. Well, let's, I guess, touch on the last question with regard to regulatory and construction.
Yeah,
I think you already covered.
Yeah, I think Union Pacific can get out there soon. We will have to talk with them about specifics once we have an official, you know, plan and whatnot. And the other thing too is, I don't know that they're going to be able to. I don't know that we should even make an attempt to say we want it at this level. I think we want to be a little bit loose on that because they're going to be doing this with equipment that they own. They're going to have, you know, getting down to 4183 might be pretty challenging, and then measuring that also. Yeah, it's something where I think we're going to have to be a little bit loose about. You know, let's try to make it as flat as possible, you know, uniform and flat as possible for monitoring and being able to measure those things, but also understanding that, like, they're going to have to do this all from the bank, because, you know, before when they've done this, they've been able to walk out the equipment as they build it, but never have we like lowered it like this. So it'll be a little bit different than what we've done before. So hopefully they can get out there and do what they got to do. But I think, you know, any potential recommendation ought to be based on like getting it as close to 4183 as possible, or whatever elevation we decide. And then also the timing will have to be, because procurement will take a hell of a lot longer than working with the railroad. We would have to be at the whim of their schedule. You know, same thing with on raising. I think we can leave that up in the air right now about based on regulation, monitoring, and then also the status of the elevation of the lake. So we just make that determination further on in the day. That's my sense. And then as far as other regulations, Army Corps, we've been down this path before. They've already evaluated impacts of this permit area, so there's nothing that we need to do with them. I didn't even check, because last time we did, they said, no, you guys have done this before. So I'm going to assume we're still in the same graces of the Army Corps. And that's the only other one that I can think of that we'd have to check the box on.
Great. Super. Well, thank you. So then I think the question is should the berm be modified now? We'll drop the experiment. We're modifying the berm. And the intent is that it's a short-term modification, recognizing that the lake is likely going to drop below 4190 this fall. And so we'll have to raise the berm back up this fall.
And if we, again, Jeff, if we can stay away from timing on the raising of that, I think we need to be flexible based off of what's observed and the conditions. So right now, if we can, you know, focus on the recommendation of, you know, what it is that we're trying to do. And I think right now it's importing some salt in preparation for, you know, future years. So I think we just make a recommendation of what elevation we want to target on the lowering, then we can continuously monitor and perhaps put together a meeting time where we can go over the results of what we've observed over the, you know, summer months. Maybe sometime in like August or late July or something, after we've done a few rounds of bi-weekly monitoring, and then decide what the next step looks like. And we'll be closer on elevation and then what's going on there.
Great. Any discussion or questions from the rest of you? So I think the draft motion that's on the table, is what I had drafted based on the previous discussion. We could delete that part because it doesn't sound like it's.
So Jeff, if we can delete that part, here's what I'd like to see out of this is if we can delete that part, because we obviously need to have more discussion with water quality on, you know, what's possible. And then, you know, I would assume like right now, let's operate under the status of what the existing rule is in the existing up-east permit. I wouldn't anticipate the change, but I think we can agree that we'll like all in good faith, Jim, Joe, myself and others who are interested work to make sense of that rule. And then also, can we get rid of the last sentence about like when we're going to do that? I think right now, because there's some interpretation there, I'd like to leave that open, and we'll work through that on our end to see what is going to be required and when.
And that word experiment.
Yeah, and any relation to experiment, we could, you could, if you think it's necessary, we could add some information in there about like helping to refine our knowledge of like nitrogen. But I think that's the only thing that we're really trying to better understand, right? Is like the nutrients that are coming through. But even that, I think it sounds like that's a pretty good idea of what's going on. Other than that, I think it's good.
I guess.
Bill.
Yeah, the only thing I'd add too is that there's a low downside risk here because there's a limited flux that we can even get through this mechanism, you know, over the time period we're looking at. So you don't want people to think, oh, this is a dramatic shift. I mean, we're going to measure what comes through and the impact it has, but it's limited. So there is a low downside risk. I would emphasize that.
Agreed. Also, one other thing I noticed on there is we have that configuration and elevation of 4183.
Right.
I think we should soften that a little bit, just knowing that it's going to be difficult to like survey that and just say this, you know, with a target of 4183 or something. Can't be picky when it's free, right?
I think that do it. So target near the original as constructed configuration, maybe as constructed isn't.
Yeah, I think just configuration is great. That makes sense to me.
All right. So I think Phil's point is well taken. Is if we're operating this even up until November, I think those are the numbers that you had run the last meeting. We should be able to measure and then estimate what the flux is through here. We probably won't be able to measure a difference in the lake itself, but we can measure the flux and the risk of, and then I guess the estimates that we have, as Bill noted, is the risks are pretty low at this for that short period of time.
Just another thought, do you want to put something in there, maybe a recommendation that increased monitoring occurs during the time of the modification? Just so we are collecting data that may be valuable or useful as we make these decisions in the future. Unless anybody disagrees with that.
I like that idea.
We'll work with Christina there too to see what's possible. And
Okay.
Just a quick caveat to be transparent that we will not get the nutrient results back in time to kind of reconvene after the summer, so that'll have to be kind of.
we'll collect it, so we'll be able to. Yeah, that's
the
good.
turnaround time just isn't that fast.
Great. So any concerns? From
Well,
our,
I mean, I think our concerns are, obvious. Jeff's, we don't need to spend time on that. Just because a lot of these things aren't buttoned down.
right.
I just have to say that.
No, I wanted to give you a chance to say that.
Thanks.
So if not, then I guess, Tim.
Yeah, hi guys. Just, I don't want to overcomplicate the motion, and maybe we don't need it here, but obviously we'd like to somehow communicate the reason why. I mean, as I read the motion right now, it really doesn't say, it says we're going to do it and we're going to monitor this stuff. It doesn't really speak to the why. So anyway, I don't know if we want to work that into the motion or just be cognizant of the fact that that this is just read to a lay person, that they don't really know why we're doing what we're doing.
Yeah, any thoughts? Others? I think in the past we've had a letter. We've had a motion to do this, and then we've drafted a letter that provided, basis for it.
I think anything that context doesn't need to be in the motion, but if it's in the letter or other communication, I think that would be valuable to just state the why of it.
Okay. So it would be adequate. And Craig? Go ahead. Oh, I think we lost Craig.
While we're waiting for Craig to come back, would it be, Tim, do you think it would capture that if we just, oh, there's Craig. Go ahead, Craig.
I'm sorry, I didn't unmute myself. So along with the why, it might be useful to put in, if as long as you're monitoring things, what are your targets? What are the salinity and the nitrogen concentrations that you would like to see that would require the berm to be reconstructed as a block? You know, something like that. An additional analysis might be required for that, but that would be something that I think would be helpful.
So one quick thought on this, and it was kind of stated before, but I think we agree that the results are not going to be monumental. We're going to get a limited amount of salt return, or inflow or flux from the north arm. And so I think like we're going to understand a little bit about the concentrations, but it's more about like figuring out what the salt mass is that comes back. And so to Tim's point, I think, you know, maybe discussing that, you know, we become really efficient at exporting salt, but that's a limited salt return. So we have an opportunity right now as we're considering what the, what may be future actions to raise the berm. We basically have an opportunity right now to import salt for a temporary time period that will prepare us for future modifications that might, be related to raising the berm or continued export of salts, but it's kind of like a rebalancing. And so I think just not knowing exactly where we're heading with it, knowing that we're just attempting to kind of rebalance that to allow us to have a little bit more of a buffer so we can continue with either normal operations or, additional modifications. And I think that could be done in the letter as well.
So I can draft a letter after this meeting and get it back out to everybody, and we have a meeting next week on the 25th. Does that slow you down if we were to vote and to approve this?
Could we do without the meeting on the 25th if we do this? I'm just wondering if we need to turn around and have a meeting in like a week, but this is going to be.
I guess the other agenda items were just talking about flows. We want to talk about the hydraulic modeling that Craig or the Water Resources has been doing. And then we also had some membership changes that we wanted to talk about. So I agree. We probably don't need another update on lake conditions this quickly. And I think like those are the three other things that we have in the agenda that pushed off.
My thought is if it's possible to just, base the letter off of the recommendation today and vote. And then if anybody feels that the letter doesn't capture the recommendation, we can reconvene. But I think I would rather skip the 25th and just have a meeting when it's timely and we can go through the whole thing and just pump that to the next agenda discussion and whatnot.
Yeah, Craig.
Yeah, our presentation was going to be trying to promote leveling out the berm, but it sounds like that's going to be happening anyway. So our presentation isn't that important.
Well, Craig, I've acknowledged I think and Eric will be involved in this as well, but we'll work with Union Pacific to try to keep it as level and uniform as possible. I think it's going to be kind of based on, what they can do with their equipment. But I think, if you talk with Eric from your division, I think he's going to be involved in this. And so he can hopefully help guide them or come up with some strategies to measure and make sure that stays uniform.
All right. Well, I guess one quick option, if I add the phrase, the SAC, the Salinity Advisory Committee recognizes an opportunity, a short-term opportunity to measure the flux, with bidirectional flow. Period. The SAC recommends this. With that, I guess, then do we need a letter? Or is a motion sufficient for the agencies? For the divisions?
I think a motion is good enough for me, especially if we just draft it now. I don't think we need an official letter from the SAC. I think a motion that we can just take that and run with it. I don't know, Jim, do you feel differently?
I still think we need to have that discussion. And maybe we should have a meeting soon to talk about what flexibilities we have. Again, it may be a moot point if it's not anticipated to change salinity that dramatically or that urgently to trigger anything, then it's, it's probably not.
I think we in conjunction, right? Like we could do this in tandem where we, work on the berm modification, then work through the, whatever potential interpretations of, de minimis or rule changes or whatever else we need to do. But I think at the end of the day, we'll have to come to some, I guess, get comfortable with the idea that like the rule's not going to be changed today. So we ought to operate under the current rule. And if, Joe, if you don't like where it's at, your vote could reflect that, and we could, we'll definitely consider that. I think it's part of the conversation, but I think that, at the end of the day as well, like I think salinity target or projections were like 147. Am I correct, Christine? 147-ish.
That was actually for the scenario where we take the berm out. So just as is, no berm modifications on 140.
140, but if we take the berm out with the modification, we're coming up close to 150, but we're maybe not even. We may not even exceed 150. So we don't know that we're going to exceed it by doing this action. We're talking 7 grams per liter based on projections. We all know that that's not perfect. Like there's other things can happen. Evaporation can increase. We don't know when we'll have to raise the berm if we have to, etc. But the idea being that like immediately as we hit the low, we're likely going to start dropping on salinity based off of inflows out of Bear River. So it's going to likely be temporary, and it's also to prepare us for the continued export of salt to the North Arm. So it's really kind of trying to, keep the model, the machine running and keeping everything, well balanced. So again, I think we operate under that status. But Jim, I guess my question was more about like, do you need a letter from the salinity committee for your division to take a recommendation? Because usually they recommend it back to our division and your division. And I think for our purpose, if we were to write this now and it's just simply, us taking this recommendation as drafted, that would be good enough for me. I don't need it to be restated on a letter. So I'm wondering if that would be good enough for you as well. And then we don't have to worry about voting on a letter later.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I know traditionally we have done letters, I think, but I don't know. I don't have an answer to that question, to be honest. If it's good enough for you, I suppose it's sufficient as long as there's some communication to our division.
Good enough for DQ is what you're saying. No, that makes sense to me. We can, if we need to put it on a letterhead as stated, we could do that, right, Jeff? You could always do that, and it'd just be as stated. We wouldn't have to add anything to it. So that'd be fine as well if it's not.
So I mean, hopefully you all can see it on the screen, but I just added the sentence: the Salinity Committee recognizes a short-term opportunity to modify the adaptive management berm in the new breach of the UP Causeway to measure and better understand changes in salt and nitrogen flux due to bidirectional flow. The committee recommends that the berm should be lowered as soon as practicable to a target near the original configuration and elevation of 4183. It is intended that this modification is temporary and will enable close monitoring and evaluation of the water, salt, and nitrogen flux through the breach opening. Monitoring intensity should be increased during this period. That capture everything?
I think that works for me.
All right. Well, then I think there isn't any more discussion on that. I think I guess I need somebody from the committee to make the motion.
So moved.
John, thank you. Second? Anybody like to second it?
Second.
Bill, great. So then I will just run through the list of committee members, and if you can vote yes or no, record. So Christine and Ryan, you cannot vote as per USGS rules. So so Bonnie Baxter.
I vote yay.
I guess Thomas isn't here, but Tim Hawks,
Yes.
Havacy,
No.
Bill Johnson,
Yes.
John Luft,
Yes.
Craig Miller,
Yes.
and I think Andrew is not here, so Elliot.
Not here, yes.
And then Brian or Travis. I think I saw Travis Anderson on.
Yes.
Okay. And I think that is all. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, so we have seven yes and 1 no. And so I think just with the way we've operated in the past, Joe, if there's something you want to provide to the agencies as well, to document your concern, then they will consider that as well. But the motion carries, and I will forward this motion off to DABQ and to Forestry, Fire, and Civil Lands. Great. So I guess path forward,
So I think once we get this recommendation, we'll make a decision, on the berm, and then work with Union Pacific to get this going. And then I think we should probably, I'd love to meet with you and Christine on what this monitoring looks like and figure out how we ramp that up based on this recommendation. And then I would also suggest we cancel the meeting next week and reschedule so we can do that when we have something more to report there.
The next regularly scheduled meeting is August 27th, and then after that is October 22nd.
Could we do one like the first week of August? Just because if our projections are showing that like mid to late August could be when we're approaching 4190, I think it'd be good to kind of ramp up, after our ramp up monitoring, kind of provide those results and make a decision then on whether or not and when anything else should happen.
Like Thursday the 6th, August 6th.
Maybe
Planning your life out that far.
my life certainly is not planned out that far, but I'm wondering, do you think we could just do a duel for that rather than try to schedule it? And then there's only 1 minute left in our scheduled meeting.
right. And then I guess the other thing is just that you and DABQ would talk about the.
Yeah, and Joe, like as Jeff offered, with your concern, which I think we all understand the concern. I think that'd be appropriate if you reached out and just asked to discussion based on that to see what kind of, flexibility or how that gets interpreted. And then we can take it from there and see what we can do in the interim. It sounds like that is the primary concern. So.
Yeah, sounds good. Sounds good, man.
All right, perfect. Matt.
All right. So we'll, Angela's going to pass out a doodle poll to schedule our next meeting. The intent is the first part of August. We're canceling next week's meeting. So we'll get that off everybody's calendar. And I think with that, take a motion to adjourn. Yes, John Buck has moved to adjourn. Second?
Second.
All right, thank Bonnie. All right, I think we'll adjourn. Thank you, everybody.